I am here to talk to you about the abolition of man. I believe that you know that. Okay, so I want to begin with this verse from Philippians, which will be the intro to the whole talk, which is Paul speaking, concluding his letter to the Philippians. Remember, this is one of the prison letters where he is in chains now, and the gospel is being declared in this. In fact, for him he says that for him to live is Christ and to die but gain. But he concludes it with these words, and they're going to be the bridge for what I'm going to say about the abolition of man. He says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is in any excellence, if there is in anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you." C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man is an engagement with the good, the true, and the beautiful. This passage in Paul's letter to the Philippians talks about these things, and to some degree it seems unusual for Paul's letters, because he seems to be talking somewhat more abstractly here, thinking about the good and the true and the lovely and the commendable. Any of these things are worthy of thinking. He will see them all to be united in Christ, of course. Colossians 1:15, in Christ all things hold together. Lewis's Abolition of Man is addressing a real problem in his day. It's an issue of the assault on human nature. It's not primarily a theological assault. It's principally a human assault, but it has theological implications because by attacking human nature, he's attacking the image of God. So it's somewhat indirect. Remember, it's written in the context, and I don't, when I say remember, you may not know, it's written in 1943, right in the midst of the Second World War and the battle between two adverse powers. On the one hand, there were the Allies, of which England and the United States and Canada were, but it was primarily against Nazi Germany and fascism. But on the other side of that was the Soviet Union and the threat of worldwide communism. And Lewis could have written this about the evils of fascism or written about the evils of communism. Instead, he chose to write about the problem of education. So this what began as a series of 3 lectures, actually, delivered up at the University of Durham, at that time in Newcastle, began as a series of 3 lectures, and it was eventually written down and called The Abolition of Man. The Abolition of Man is actually a reference to the 3rd of the 3 lectures. I'm going to come to that at the end. That's why I asked you what the breakdown of the class was. I would have done it in 3 separate components, but we'll work it out. To me, it is addressing the modern problem of the de-Christianization of schools, which we note in our own day and in our own time. And I'm going to make it relevant to our own day and our own time, and not just talk about what Lewis is saying. But this elimination of Christianity from the public system is to some degree an attempt to de-anthropomorphize people, so to take away the distinctive humanity of people by reducing them to autonomous personalities and mutual rational interests and reciprocal moral obligations, but not talk about the distinct feature of human nature, which is that we bear the image of God, and that there is an objectively verifiable moral nature in humanity upon which all of our knowledge depends. The whole concept of validity is a moral category, but it's also an objective category, and without it, science is impossible. But what Lewis describes is the descent into scientism. Now, do you know what scientism is? Have you heard this phrase used at all? What is scientism? Can someone go ahead?
It's basically seeing science as the primary way of getting knowledge, and all other disciplines are inferior to science.
It's sort of that. Yeah, that's good. It's not the primary way. It's pretty much the only way. Science is science, and science is objective, and it uses its means and determines what it is as well. And everything outside of it is subjective and not really science at all. It's not really knowledge. It's opinion. It's a value judgment. It may be a subjective preference, but it doesn't have any general validity. The method is that of A.J. Ayer in Lewis's day. I'm going to talk more about him in a minute as well. But the idea is the doctrine that man is caused by unintelligent first principles, which is, of course, self-contradictory. And Lewis will write about this in various works. He writes about it in Miracles as well, the so-called argument from reason, where he says that modern scientism has a view of human life connected with progressive evolution, which is basically that everything comes from a natural stuff. Everything, including ourselves. And insists upon that. Because it insists upon that, it insists that what we call reasoning is not really reasoning. It's the appearance of reasoning. It's the appearance of thinking. When I say the appearance to ourselves. When we think that we are thinking, we're actually just, it's unclear actually, something like a biochemical response is happening so that we feel like we're thinking and we talk like we're thinking, but actually it's just a genetic or biochemical, in his day biochemical, in our day genetic response that gives us the illusion of thought. But it has no objective validity, and it can't appeal to reason because naturalism is a self-contained system. So let me present it in the form of a syllogism, if I can. Naturalism, the idea that everything comes from nature, is irrational. And Darwinistic evolution is a form of naturalism, therefore Darwinism is irrational. He is talking about Darwinism, actually, and evolution and the idea that everything comes from nature. And he's speaking against the idea that we have a distinct moral, rational nature as human beings. And furthermore, that there is such a thing as God and supernatural means and agents, which is excluded from modern naturalism. Now, Lewis is here talking in The Abolition of Man about how the education system has inculcated the idea that we are merely the product of natural forces. And when I say merely, that's a word he's going to use repeatedly, this word merely, which he thinks has great power. So the illustration that he uses, which you will remember right at the outset, what's going on there? Oh, I don't care if it's blank, never mind. I'll just leave it on just in case. At the outset, he talks about the experience of a waterfall and is quoting Coleridge on this, and one observer says that the waterfall is sublime. The word sublime, by the way, is a reference to an aesthetic experience, so it's a degree of beauty. It's the height of beauty, in fact. It's the most beautiful thing. The waterfall is sublime. The educators, and by the way, the book that Lewis refers to as the Green Book was written by two modern educators. He doesn't name the book because he doesn't want to embarrass the educators. And he says that he also doesn't want to isolate it to this one book because he sees it as characteristic of the modern education system. But the educators say when the author, or when this man says that it is sublime, what he means to say is that he has sublime feelings. It's not that the sublimity is there, it's that he feels like it's there because he's talking about beauty, and beauty, it will go on to say, is something that is subjective. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, we'll say in English. It's a proverb, right? He will go on to describe other categories, such as, if I can get this to work. Oh, it's now gone. Pardon me. Put it back up. Moral categories like goodness. He'll quote the Roman proverb that it's good and beautiful to die for your country. Remember? And he will talk about two paths of education. One that treats us like a Roman father treats his son, which is that when he teaches him, he does so by example, like Paul speaks of here. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things and the God of peace will be with you. So it's a model of imitation. It's a model of example. One leads by example. There's a moral example that is involved in the teaching process. It's not just the passing on of information. It's a way of living. And of course, Paul is following Jesus as well. There's no escape from this. This isn't his own path. This is Christ's path. But the idea of a type of education that's following a moral example is the historic and classical understanding of what education is. So it's primarily training in virtue. Primarily. At this institution, every professor is required to sign a lifestyle policy. One of the errors of our day is just to think this is about, avoiding, bad things, certain types of sexual activity or certain types of drugs or alcohol or whatever, that sort of thing. That's not really what it's about. That's getting caught up in superficial things. It's really about the importance of a moral example as an aspect of discipleship and modeling that in the classroom. That's really what it's about. And there are ways in which that can be contradicted, and those are enumerated, just so that we're abundantly clear what those might be. And they are, again, they're legion. Many little ways in which that can be defrauded. Pornography, who knows. But really, it's trying to say that the moral enterprise of education is vital to passing on and teaching properly. Now, that's an old school view. It's not old-fashioned. It's what will be called by educators the part of the perennial philosophy. It's a philosophy that has never died out, but is much under assault, ironically, in the education system itself. So that view is, and he gives the example of a Roman father and his son saying, "Son, do as I do." So when the father says to his son, "It's good and beautiful to die for your country, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori," he believes it himself, and he would do it himself. He's not telling his son to do anything other than what he himself would do, because he believes it. Whereas the modern education system, and this is the great contrast that Lewis makes, is more like an experiment on children. He's not saying to the child, "Do as I do," he's saying, "Do as I say." In other words, directing the child to follow a path that he doesn't know where it leads, and he doesn't know what the effect will be upon his son either. So Lewis says, if the old way of education could be seen as something like a propagation, so what he does himself, the child who comes from his own body will also do, then the modern way of education, in contrast, is the way a turkey farmer looks upon a turkey. It's something that you're going to do to the turkey, and in the end you may eat the turkey. But it's an experiment. It's to regard the child as a product and as a thing rather than as a person of the same nature as himself. Now, if you want to see another way of illustrating this is not in Lewis's illustration, it's my illustration. Conceptually, and I've noted this in other classes, some of you have taken them with me, there's a conceptual shift in human propagation. It goes from the word begetting, which is sort of the old phrase we have in the King James Bible, to procreation, which is a little more scientific, to the modern term, reproduction. What's the difference? They all refer to more or less the same thing. We would recognize them as such. One sounds old-fashioned. The other sounds very familiar. What's the difference between the three? Wherein lies the shift? Yes? Well, of course, okay. So there's the preposition that precedes it. Yes? Yes?
The loss of the concept of creation is production at the end.
Right. So reproduction can be used of anything. And the suggestion is that the things that are reproduced are the exact same as the things, the original thing. So you have a reproduction of an iPhone in your pocket or something like that, and it's exactly the same as every other one. There's no difference. The individuality of the thing is not emphasized by the act of reproduction. And the connection between the original one and the second one is irrelevant in the term reproduction. Whereas in begetting, there's something of the nature of the original that's passed on to the second, to the child. This is emphasized throughout Scripture when it talks about the father of the children. Jesus is the son of Joseph, Jesus bar Joseph. And at the beginning of Matthew's gospel begins with a genealogy. Luke's gospel, it's in chapter 3. In Matthew's, it goes back to David. In Luke's, it goes all the way back to Adam. But there's a begetting. And in the begetting, there's something of a connection between the generations. The connection is also of something of the substance and the personhood of the original is being passed on to the successive generations. Whereas the idea of reproduction is that there's one thing and everything else is just a copy of it, and it can be copied. Note that the term is also amenable to mechanical copying. It also contains the suggestion, very amenable to modern science and scientism, which is we can improve upon what we reproduce through modern technology. If there are new scientific means, then we can make the old things better. Just like your new iPhone is better than the original iPhone, which is a brick, and you can't use. The sense of technological improvement is also applied to human nature, and it fits the evolutionary idea that we are in some way superior to everyone that's gone before us. Do we not think that? Maybe not individually, but as a culture, do we not think that we're superior to those that have gone before us? In what sense superior? That was a question, not a rhetorical one. In what sense are we superior? Yes?
Well, we can communicate in like seconds.
Extraordinary. So I'm recording this here. It'll go up on the internet, I hope, in some way, if I'm not, as usual, incompetent in being able to do even that. I could also, through something like FaceTime or something like that, communicate with somebody on the other side of the globe instantly, which is extraordinary. If you look at like the Palantir in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, there's the seeing stones. This is a terrific power. I don't think Tolkien even imagined that new technology. They had the telephone, but they had a visual image, and extraordinary. So these are clearly advances. In what other sense are we superior to the past? Besides technology. When I say we, you don't have to agree with it. What would our culture say we are superior? Yes?
Like agriculture and farming techniques.
Okay, those also? So yield in crops, mechanical reproduction, sure. Wes?
They would argue that we have moral superiority. Right?
Yep.
At this point, we develop and learn new things, so we're kind of in humanity.
And what would be the character of the improvement?
What do you mean, like?
In what way are we superior to the past? What is it about the way we look at things that marks us out as superior? Never mind
Right,
what.
where they would just appeal to like certain characteristics, like we're more, I don't know, tolerant,
Good.
with a better understanding of certain topics, like, I don't know, cliche would be transgenderism.
No, this is good. Yeah, okay, so now you're going to other consequences, but that's good. But the original one, tolerant, yes. So let me start with that. So in 1986, a book came out by Alan Bloom called what? What was the name of the book? I just drawn a blank. That's not a rhetorical question. The what is it? Dear, that's terrible. Something about the American mind. Sorry? Closing of the American Mind. Yes, thank you. In which he talked about the great opening of the American mind. What? The Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom was about the loss of our sense of a moral nature, and the only value he could find in undergraduates, upon which they would all agree, is that tolerance was the virtue par excellence. That was in 1986, by the way. I was an undergraduate then. It was 87 when it came out. And he said that was the one thing upon which they all agreed and insisted was a virtue, and which marked us out as superior to others, because we were tolerant of people who were different and ideas that were different and things that were different. So there was a superiority in the sense that we had come to that point where everything that had divided people in the past was no longer true of us. Now we were on top of that. We would include all of those things and tolerate them. And what Bloom noted was that this was the same attitude that marked the people of the Weimar Republic in Germany before the Nazis came in. They were marked by their tolerance and their indifference to moral absolutes. When I say indifferent, they thought that they did not hold. They were not objectively true. In other words, they rejected the idea of goodness and beauty and truth. They were willing to say that there was a good, but it was a good for the German people. And there was a truth, and it was for the German people. And there was a beauty, but it was the beauty for the German people. So it was true to their identity group. But it wasn't true across the board, because if it was true across the board, there would be a idea of right and wrong that would hold them under judgment. They would be required to conform to that idea of a moral nature, a common moral nature across all humanity. Having abandoned that, they were willing to do extraordinary things. They were willing to admit the idea of evolution as progress, invariably. So they would be willing to, through psychology, they will be willing to ensure that no one suffers in any way that would besmirch their sense of transcendence. So the German people thought that they were superior to all others, right? Their race was. And they used modern psychological means not only to experiment on Jews and Gypsies and Slavs, but they did so in order to perfect the German people. And they could do it through various means. One means was psychology, because if you have psychological distresses, you don't master yourself. You suffer from depression, or something's on top of you, it's pushing you down. Whereas modern psychological means are techniques, whether chemical or through behavior or whatever, to help you to master yourself, to act like the divine, semi-divine human race that they thought they would be. Or they could use eugenics, breeding experiments, to breed the master race. We cut out those who are going to be suboptimal. It's a bit of a euphemism. So they would commit genetic profiling. They wouldn't call it genetics because the science as such didn't exist, but they were looking for, and they would not allow people to breed that did not have the right physical characteristics. So they sterilized those who were mentally unfit or people with physical infirmities. And there was experimentation on people. Now, this didn't only happen in Germany, it happened in Canada. It was approved of by people that Canadians regard as heroes of the medical system, including Tommy Douglas, the inventor of our modern medical system. He supported eugenics. So did Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, which is why she stuck her abortion clinics in the midst of the ghettos. It was to perfect human nature. That was the point of it. They also applied it to economics so that nobody would ever suffer material want ever again. It was a political agenda. And they would, above all, seek to banish inequality, because inequality is a sign of natural difference. And if we are going to achieve this new humanity, for which everyone is exactly the same, part of a group, then we have to banish all senses of inequality between them. Every sense. We're all excellent. We all get first prize in the race. There's no distinction between a child or an adult or a male or a female. None of those things. These things will be banished by the new science of humanity, which is trying to bring us to the next stage of evolution, because it sees human nature as just part of a natural biological thing. And no individual personhood is acknowledged at all. Lewis, that's what Lewis is talking about here. He's saying that the education system of his day is doing this resolutely. And the way it does it is by getting rid of the sense of the moral nature of humanity. And it does it through the education system, so that young people will immediately think that any statement about goodness or about beauty is merely subjective. It has no objective status. So when somebody makes a moral objection to the aborting of another human being, or the killing of an infant, or the euthanizing of an adult, or of an infirm person, that moral objection is merely a subjective response. People are trained through their education system to come to that conclusion. It's not accidental. It's not because they are actually detestable people that they don't care when somebody is being killed. It's that they are trained to think and educated to think that this is not in the name of science. This is the unfortunate but correct conclusion, is that we should regard individual humans as insignificant. Can you see how that fits? Whether you like it or not, that's irrelevant. Actually, if you don't like it, then you have a bigger problem. But it's with Lewis and with what he calls the Tao. And I'm going to come to the Tao in the next segment, and I might just tip it off here. But here I want to talk about education. But it's scientific naturalism that he's primarily discussing here. Comments or questions at this point before I proceed? I'm just talking and talking and all. Yes, sir.
So I find it's very easy to convince people with a Christian background that morality is objective. But when you bring aesthetics into the picture, suddenly that proverb you mentioned, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, is like gospel, and they won't accept that there could be objective beauty.
You're correct. They do that all the time. It drives me insane.
What's your way of handling that? How do you convince people?
The musical scale upon which they play their choruses, or we play our choruses, or hymns or whatever, is a mathematically precise, demonstrable reality which they can hear and they find beautiful in whatever variation on it, that the actual notes have the exact same frequency variation between the various notes. And when you put them together, it creates a harmony. There's a certain correlation between the notes and the placement of them together. It creates a sense of harmony. Harmony is a sense of unity, and it creates a pleasurable response. I've never met anyone who doesn't like music. The type of music, that varies, but that they like music, nobody have I ever met that did not like music. Their response to that is the response to beauty. They are going to find it so the illustration that I will use then is that, I don't know when this happened, but there was something called the worship wars in churches. It probably carries on to some degree, but I think the battle's been lost by the older generation, if you will, so hymns, and in the favor of modern choruses. When I say it's been lost, I don't think it's ever wholly lost, but primarily, churches now play choruses, contemporary lyrics, and they don't, the organs get ripped out, thrown out, they don't play them. Why did that happen, and what happened in the midst of that? It happened after I was converted, so I can't really discuss it as an insider. As an outsider, I observed people talking about how churches would split over whether they were going to play contemporary worship lyrics or hymns. My question is in that, because at first I found this incredible, that why on earth would churches split over something other than the essentials of the Christian faith? They're not splitting over the divine human nature of Christ or the Trinity. They're not splitting over what the gospel is. They're splitting over music, right? And what sort of witnesses that in public? I found it incredible. But on the other hand, I feel just as strongly about the music. So what is it there? Well, that's exactly what it is. Both sides feel in that situation that this is a non-negotiable. This is a line in the sand. I will not have that. It's going to be on this, and we're going to split, and this is a gospel issue for people, whether they're young or old. Why are they responding that way? Are they just expressing their subjective preferences? Is that how they see it? I don't think so. They see it as a matter of basically life and death for them in their experience in the church. So that's the illustration when people say that beauty's in the eye of the beholder and that beauty's merely subjective. I say, but you don't actually act that way. You think that it's more important than that, far more important than that. So so that's the illustration that brings it to people in a way that they can understand. The question for me in that, and I don't want to get too far down that path of talking about church music, is my perception of beauty. How does that fit with the idea of goodness and truth? Because it's the unity of the three that is going to be the decisive factor. The best music will unite the good, the true, and the beautiful, because God himself is of the essence of the good, the true, and the beautiful. In fact, the universities, which is universities are Christian institutions, began in the 12th century, roughly, over disputes over the universals. And the universals were goodness, beauty, and truth. One school said that these things, these were called the realists, said that goodness, beauty, and truth were real, not subjective. They were real things, and we could know them, and God was the essence of these things. But we genuinely, when we talk about things in terms of their goodness, beauty, and truth, we're talking about a real thing. We're not just using terms that, whereas there's another school called nominalism. Note that it's about language here, but it's a split over language. The nominalists said that these are just words that relate to other words, but they don't actually describe the reality of something. It's just it's a term that we use. It's just a name, and the name could change, and the perception could change, but and tastes can change. So one was talking about the perennial philosophy of erase that, and talking about the real nature of goodness, and beauty, and truth, and the other was saying that these things are culturally conditioned, subjectively defined, and they are words that really don't apprehend the true nature of things. In my experience, most evangelicals, even if they agree with you that objective goodness is true, they think that language is just words. And they express this by not upholding the Word of God in the worship services. It's not the centerpiece of their services. It once was, it no longer is. Sometimes I've been in services where Scripture is not even read. It's called a worship service. The Word of God's not even read. The words that are sung, how do the words that are sung relate to the Word of God? If the Word of God is literally the Word of God, and we regard it as God's revelation of Himself, how is that reflected in the services in which we're praising Him? Where does it fit? The songs that we sing, how do they relate to that sense of the reality of the Word of God and the reality of the person who is the Word of God? How is that reflected in that? Because I don't see it often. There's a lot of songs, and the songs, by the way, yeah, I'm tipping my hand. You already know I like hymns rather than choruses. Modern worship choruses tend to be very subjective and experiential, responsive. There's a place for that, by the way. But they're all of that nature. They begin with I. They don't talk about who God is and what He's done. They talk about my response to that. And they're heartfelt, but they are really largely subjective, which is an interesting observation. To some degree, then, the evangelicalism has responded to the educational movement of getting rid of the objective nature of goodness, beauty, and truth by agreeing that beauty can go, while on the other hand saying it can't go on in the sense of my musical preferences, but it can go in the sense that there isn't a standard of beauty that we have to conform to. So if you're going to give on any one of the three, by the way, you're going to give on all of them. So that we will give way on beauty. That's what will come next. Goodness. Because again, goodness doesn't fit the scientific paradigm of truth. Because truth, there's a fact-value distinction. Let me talk about that now. In what Lewis is describing here, there's a distinction between facts on the one hand and values on the other, which goes all the way back to David Hume. Can someone explain the fact-value distinction to me? Those of you who are philosophers. What is the fact-value distinction for the rest of us?
It's sort of like the objective-subjective.
It is.
Right?
So facts are
Objective
and values are,
subjective.
yes. So facts are things that we can verify. Facts are not truth, by the way, but they are used as if they were truth. So those are the facts. That means you can't. That's the truth. Facts, though, strictly speaking, are things that we make. It's from the verb, Latin verb facere, to make. And it reflects the scientific method. We make certain of things by an experiment. There's the experimental method. We follow the method, and at the end of it, if we can come up with a conclusion, then somebody else can repeat the conclusion. Now we've made certain of the facts. That's a fact then. Those are things that are objectively verifiable in an experiment. That works well with the visible nature. It doesn't work well with the facts of history, because you can't repeat things that happened in the past. You can't. It's by definition, they happened in the past, so you can't repeat them. You can go to talk about the testimony of the veracity of the event, but that's still not quite the same as doing it for yourself. So all historical knowledge then becomes a little bit less objective. Historians go crazy about this, but it is the effect of scientism. Values of beauty, evaluations of beauty, and particularly moral goodness, we note people can disagree on these things, and they do all the time. In fact, Christians would historically have accounted for this by this word sin. Yes, you think that that's good, but it's not good. Like in Romans 1. Another. Gosh, I wish this thing would stop doing this. It's just cooling down for me. Okay, so let me go to Romans 1. Romans 1. Yes. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they're without excuse. Paul writes that the truth is something that can be denied, and it's denied in unrighteousness, in other words, out of wickedness, in a moral rebellion. So your morality actually trumps your sense of true things and false things. What you decide as truth will be determined by your moral nature. Isn't that interesting? Whereas to insist on a consistent moral nature for everyone, which is what the scientific method originally did, is to suggest that everyone is going to have to be held to the same standard. And there are various ways of adjudicating that, but one of them is in saying this is what moral character looks like. You ought to be able to describe truthful, courageous, just. There are certain moral features that you will insist upon, even in the scientist. If the scientist is not going to be corrupted by self-interest, he's going to have to act in certain ways. There are ways that we police this to this day in the academy, like plagiarism, academic fraud. Well, it's a form of lying. What's wrong with that? In the internet age, you can just copy paste. It's very easy. It doesn't seem like a moral transgression. It's because it's so simple. It is if you are passing off somebody else's work as your own. Well, what's wrong with that? Nothing per se. If the idea of reproduction holds, and we're all just individual instances of the same thing. But it does matter if we are thinking that individuals matter and what they do matters, and that we individually have responsibility, and we have a responsibility to our neighbor, and our neighbor is different than us. But if we see ourselves as just little instances of the same thing, it doesn't matter if we steal somebody else's work. Went off on a bit of a tangent there. But morality attends all of our judgment, and I think aesthetics do as well. But I agree with you that the perception of beauty is one that most people are not going to hold to. In fact, they'll fight very strongly against. And I wonder why that is. Yeah, go ahead.
I had one conversation that I was talking more abstract things like music or painting as beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
This person didn't like the idea because if you apply it to people, then you say some people are more beautiful than others,
which is simply
some
true.
Are uglier than others, and that's an abhorrent suggestion in our culture today.
As I say, the leveling effect of equality. And then if you're really humble and you're beautiful, you say that you're not beautiful, or you try and look ugly. Some people are more beautiful than others. But the standard of beauty for Christians isn't only the natural beauty. There's a beauty in God that defies those categories. Isaiah 53 and 54 talk about, we have no idea what Jesus looked like, right? There's no description of him in the Gospels at all. Isaiah 53 talks about somebody who was marred and so bloodied that he was unbearable to look at. It's the suffering servant. Is it a reference to Christ? I'm not sure if it's a physical description or if it's more of a metaphorical description, but there's something of Christ in the presence of those around him that they found him not just morally reprehensible, they found him disgusting. Like his opponents, they despised him in an almost aesthetic repugnance. It might be describing the battering he took. The cross itself wouldn't be sufficient for that. He was beaten. I guess he had the crown of thorns stuck into his head. He was flogged on his back. But this is describing his face, his whole appearance. I don't know if it's from Isaiah, so it's obviously not meant as a physical description in some sense, but is it that? But that's called beauty. This is the standard of God's beauty, so it defies the human categories of beauty. It's seeing the beautiful, in other words, in people that are not aesthetically beautiful. There's a new standard of beauty. It's Christ's beauty. You can see it in the unborn. You can see it in the handicapped. That these persons have the attribute of being persons bearing the image of God. That is beautiful. Their fallibility, their deformity, their infirmity. There's something beautiful about that. It's the weakness of man that God has taken for his own by taking on a body. Anyway, but you're right. That immediate, we can't judge on the basis of appearances, because that would be suggesting that some people are more beautiful than others. Well, is that not true? I mean, of course it is. To deny that is to lack credibility, I think. This is silly. If you mean by that we ought not to idolize beauty in that sense, that's a different thing. But to say that it's not true, that some people are more beautiful than others, that's just plainly ridiculous. Isn't it? Well, I mean, anyone who wants to argue with me on that, you're welcome to it. I just think you're lying. It's the common lie. The best lies are the ones that everybody agrees to. We don't honor God by lying about the truth of the matter. A variation on that is gender legislation, then, which is to deny the maleness or femaleness of every person. If we really want to show our commitment to equality, we'll commit to an idea that appearance is totally irrelevant to a person's status, totally irrelevant. And they can self-identify themselves however they want. That's a real commitment to, it's a commitment to equality. It's also a commitment to an idea, and it's an idea that isn't only at odds with what everyone else can see, it totally contradicts it. So gender identity legislation says that there's no relation between your biology and your gender. Zero. Not in any way. Which is pure ideology. It's pure ideology. Of the most obvious form. And if we agree to that, we're committed to a concept of truth that cannot be verified. It's non-verifiable. It cannot be contradicted. In other words, it abandons the laws of logic. In which case we can't think about it. We just have to agree to it. Now go back to what I said about the two paths of education. One being for a father to tell his son it's good and beautiful to die for his country because he would. And he's saying to his son, it's good for you as well. But he would do it himself. Whereas the modern educator will say, do as I say, and then you will do it upon yourself. Would a modern educator emasculate himself or inject himself? Or would he have the students do that and see what happens? The vast majority, it's happening with young people, and it's happening through the education system. Particularly through the sex ed curricula, and particularly in relation to gender identity, which has now been legislated as a human right. You can't have a human right if you don't understand what human nature is. What's the popular view of human nature in our public educators? Can you tell me?
Choose your own adventure.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, choose your own adventure. That's not bad. What is the view of human nature in our world today? Because I noted that our government has now adopted gender identity as a human right and made it, I believe it's a criminal offense to speak against that idea. So the question is, what is the view of human nature that is contained in that and elsewhere? What is human nature? Maybe more broadly and less specifically there. What is human nature according to our contemporaries? Because to have human rights, you have to know what a human is. So what is it? Does anyone know?
Well, just for the go along with scientism, I guess it's just as long as you have a functioning brain.
Yes, this is not far off. You have to have a brain function. It has to be functioning.
But then the second question would be, then what about those people?
I'm not sure that's sufficient, by the way, but go on. Go say more.
And if you go under that premise, then what about those people who can't use their brain? So it's not humans anymore? Couldn't you just wipe them out?
Of course you can. They're brain dead. So brain is one of the discipline of psychology, which I never cease to give a hard time, is the science of the psyche. It's a study of the psyche. What is the psyche?
Soul.
If you're a Christian, you say the soul. It's very Christian of you. And most Christians will say the soul, and so they have a more holistic sense. It's the whole person. Is that what the science of psychology, or the discipline as itself, tends to? In which direction does it lean? There's been at least 4 different answers to this. So some will say it's the soul, and that's probably the view here, I suspect. Some will say it's the mind. So the mind as opposed to the body. Some will say it is the feelings. Psychology deals with feelings. Some will say it's the brain. And that's the most common view in our day, that the psyche of psychology is the brain. So they look at the brain, and they look at the chemicals that create a sense of depression, anxiety, whatever, and they will address those through biochemical means. Sometimes electrical, but usually biochemical, so you'd be given some sort of medication to deal with the problems in your brain. And that is addressing the psyche. So I mean, I'm not being controversial by saying that. I think that's more or less the understanding. There's the first problem with that, which I don't even want to go down, is that there are over 100 schools of psychology in North America, all accredited and having the status of scientific standing, that fundamentally disagree on the subject that they study. Right? That seems problematic to me. They can't agree on what it is. Even the Christians that say it's the soul, the essence of the person, that's just begging the question, what's the person then? Not that it's wrong that it's the essence of the person, but what is a person then? It's a theological term, by the way. It goes back to Trinitarian theology. Yes?
Would you say it's kind of the same thing for like moral ethics, though? Like different schools of moral ethics try to say that like the way morality functions is there's only like different ways you can support it. It's grounded in biology, it's grounded in evolution, it's grounded in God, it's grounded in the greatest being. And they all kind of disagree with each other as well.
They do. So the problem I described in psychology, which is just an apt illustration, a way for people to see the problem, is they're all over in almost every discipline. The humanities have been fractured, and in such a way that they disagree. Disagreements go with academia. That's arguing about the truth or falsehood of ideas and the goodness or badness of things, the beauty or the ugliness of things. That goes in the academy. There's nothing wrong with the disagreement. The problem is that there's no means to reconcile them. That's the problem. In other words, if you're talking about the humanities, and I will take theology as a part of the humanities, if you have no sense of what a person is, and I'm not talking about an instantiation of a person, of which I am and everyone in this room is, but the person, the divine person, if you don't have that, you have no means by which to verify whether your views on this are correct or false. So without theology, the humanities invariably fragment and fracture and disagree, and they disagree not just incidentally but fundamentally, and they cannot ever come to a resolution. And the longer that goes on, the more and more problematic it becomes. And then the standard of verification becomes that of scientism, of naturalism, because naturalism is the direct, open contradiction of theology and its relevance. It didn't begin in the 20th century, by the way. It happened in the early 19th century, in the Romantic period. But scientific naturalism is unable to recognize free will, rationality, or even ethics in a normative sense. It's unable. It's not that it doesn't, it can't. Naturalism precludes those things. It also precludes rationality. So it's committed to irrationalism. So then the question is, if this is education, and it is being the way in which knowledge is being transferred from one generation to the next, at what point are people going to say this is not education any longer? And would the character of the education system that was committed to the view of reproduction or do as I say, would this not just be propaganda? Who thinks that education, modern education, is propaganda? Show of hands. Not enough of you. You need to think some more then. Doesn't matter. There's no penalty for disagreeing with me. I have no power whatsoever. The fundamental basis of the modern view of education is to deny rationality its validity. How then is it knowledge? By the way, science and scientism are not the same thing. The scientific method begins in the 17th century by Christian scientists. They have a certain understanding of moral nature. They also believe, by the way, that you have to agree with certain theological statements in order to conduct science. And we'll say, well, hold on, you can be an atheist scientist. Yes, but then and of course you can follow the methodology, but eventually the conclusions that you're going to derive, because by the way, all evidence needs to be interpreted, right? There's no such thing as the facts speak for themselves. We say that as a phrase, a figure of speech almost, but facts don't speak for themselves. Like when you do an experiment, you have the data, let's say it's a social science, you'll do the stats. There you've got the stats. Okay, what do the stats mean? Well, now you have to interpret them. The facts do not speak for themselves. Somebody needs to say what the facts mean. The social scientists will usually say, in response to queries, oh, we need to do another study, which is true. But they never get to the end of the studies because the facts never speak for themselves. But this idea that A.J. Ayers is promoting in Lewis's day something called logical positivism. And I think he is the sort of the whipping boy for Lewis here. He's not directly addressing him, but he is the one who's mainly in his thoughts. So if one man says oysters are good and another says I think they're bad, we recognize they have nothing to argue about. One likes oysters, the other doesn't like oysters. There's nothing there. It's just subjective. The other writer or author who will agree with A.J. Ayers is Bertrand Russell. So this idea of morality as a merely subjective thing is very common in his day and almost ubiquitous. So let me go back to the view of, I think I can put this up so I can draw on the board now. There we go. The view that Lewis presents here, what I call the philosophia perennis, the perennial philosophy, is the belief that rationality, and by the way, the human person. Does anyone know Boethius' definition of the human person? No? The individual substance of a rational nature. It's wonderful because it's a very tight definition. It's complex because it'll take you a few hours to unpack all this sense of the importance of this word, this word, this word, and this word here. All four words need to be teased out a bit. But note that rationality is an essential part of humanity. Animals don't have reason. Animals also can't speak. I was at a apologetics conference out in Calgary, and I quoted, and I'm going to repeat it here. Where is it? One of the people in where is it? Oh, yay. There it is. One of Darwin's contemporaries said this. His name is Max Muller. He was an Orientalist, so he was an expert in Oriental languages, now called Asian languages. He said this. He said, language is our Rubicon. Do you know what the Rubicon is? The Rubicon is a place in Italy that Julius Caesar was commanding the armies of Rome, and the armies of Rome are not allowed to march into Rome without permission. They're not allowed to do that. When Caesar marched his armies across the Rubicon, it meant civil war. So that's the Rubicon moment. So language is our Rubicon, and no brute will dare cross it. The science of language, says Muller, will yet enable us to withstand the extreme theories of evolutionists and to draw a hard and fast line between man and brute. This is in the 19th century. A few years ago now, let me find this exact quote, and I'll quote it for you again. Have I got it on this? No, I don't have it on this. That's unfortunate. In 2014, in a journal of psychology, the 8 most prominent evolutionists of our day, or 8 of them, including the most prominent linguistics professor, Noam Chomsky, you heard of Chomsky, wrote a article, which they all agreed to, so 8 signatories, in which they said, for the past 40 years, there's been an explosion of study into the origin of language and its connection with humanity. A veritable explosion. There's been a sense of great progress being made. They said, our opinion is that we have made no progress. We have absolutely no idea of where language comes from or the nature of it. Which means what Muller said 150 years ago holds true to this day, that the chief feature of humanity that distinguishes him from the other animals, his capacity to speak and to reason. There is no explanation in Darwinistic theory. None. Now, a theory that can't account for the main characteristic of humanity, after 150 years of thinking, is not a very good theory. If it were why we have stand on our 2 feet rather than 4 feet, it would be less significant. But it talks about the main thing that distinguishes humanity from all other things. It's our ability to speak and to reason and to use these means to exercise dominion over the other creatures. No? Darwinism, once again, is a form of naturalism. Naturalism is a rationalism. Darwinism is a form of naturalism. Therefore, you got it. But that's science. People don't want to get caught up in the creationist versus Darwinist thing because they think it's about a biological theory and it's not about the gospel. It is about the gospel because it's about the truth and the nature of the truth and our capacity to understand the truth, which would mean that we have a reasoning capacity and the ability to use language to discuss it. Yes?
Noam Chomsky also said that language is like human beings are born with innate knowledge of that. So
He did.
Does that point towards like how would that factor in on the argument of evolution?
Well, to say that it's innate means that he doesn't know where it came from. He's saying that we have it and other animals do it, but it factors into it. He just knows that we have the ability to...
You're saying they were like born with it, they were not clean slates. You have...
Right. Right. Yeah, so I don't think it bears on it at all. It's part of our nature. Yes, but where did this come from? Because to prove evolution, you have to show, right? Where does this originate? This peculiar power, which distinguishes human beings from other animals. And they say that there is a continuum there of some sort. Where does it come from? He's no account for it. It's innate. So by the way, is sexual differentiation, which starts before you're born. Binary. You're male or female in the womb. Beyond dispute. Both of which, by the way, are denied in modern post-humanism. I'll talk about post-humanism at the end. But post-humanism is the attempt to stop anthropomorphizing people. That's meant to be clever in some way. But we need to stop anthropomorphizing people and pretending people are distinctive from other animals. As if they have autonomous personalities, as if they were individuals, as if they had mutual rational interests, as if they had reciprocal moral obligations. We need to stop that. We need to see mankind as being just like the animals. We need to see mankind as just like the water and the trees and the forests and the air. We need to see mankind as not categorically distinct from computers. It's cyborg humanism or post-humanism. It's eradicating the distinctive human nature of humanity. It is pushed through the education system, and Darwinism, once again, eradicates the distinct human nature of humanity. Or rationality does distinguish us, but it's not a feature of that they can explain it all in any way. But they need to use rationality in order to have science. Anyway, I will, because you've said 8:30, let me stop there and then I'll come back and I'm going to talk about two first of all, the Tao, which is the sense of moral right and wrong, and then, I guess there's no rest, and then the abolition of man. And I will connect those two together, but we'll take a break. 15 minutes, is that normally? Okay, take 15, and then we'll come back and we will carry on. Thanks.